Hey, what's going on? It's Jens. Today it's all about long exposure photography, and therefore I've ordered two different ND filters, a variable one and a fixed ND 1000. So what is an ND filter and why would you want to use it? An ND filter is basically a black piece of glass. It's like sunglasses. So this allows us to use extremely long exposure times even at daytime. This is very interesting when you think of shooting water like waterfalls or the beach, because then the motion of the water will create a nice fog effect. Quick intro, and then we're going to take a closer look on the filters and the image quality using a filter like this and what ideas I came up with. There are a lot of ND filters on the market which show some issues when using them, especially when using a wide angle lens or the variable ones. So normally when you darken the variable ones, there's like a cross appearing on the image. But let's focus first on the ND 1000. I will put it onto the lens which is filming me right now, which is a 24mm full frame wide angle lens. I am in aperture mode right now. So the camera will adjust the exposure time automatically. And with the filter, it changes from a 50th to 10 seconds. This means we can use exposure times 500 times longer than without the ND filter. With the ND 1000 you can actually use exposure times which are 1000 times longer. The automatic of my camera here some kind of fails and the resulting image is a little darker. The camera computes 500 times, but actually it's 1000. Okay, now that we know what this thing here is good for, we just need something fantastic to photograph, which is only possible using this piece of glass. As mentioned, it is a great idea to photograph objects at daytime with long exposure, which normally are just completely overexposed, and it's just not possible to add this kind of motion blur to the images. Clouds are perfect, or water, or clouds and water. As there is no high waterfall around, I decided to go to the German island Fehmarn. Again, there is no waterfalls, but at least there's some coast and rocks and hopefully some wind to add some nice splashy fog effect to our image. As the weather was pretty horrible, that means no sunset, just clouds, wind and rain. I had to be pretty fast to be there when the sun came up. So I started at the daytime shooting some fishermen and the results were pretty okay. It is very important that there is some movement on the water, otherwise this fog effect will not appear. I've used exposure times between 20 and 30 seconds to achieve this effect. As you can see on the images, the fog effect is there, but it is not perfect. So maybe it would have been a lot better to use exposure times like 60 seconds to get a nicer fog. And therefore you can stack those ND filters. So combining the ND 1000 with the variable one offers you a lot of flexibility to use extremely long exposure times at daytime. For the combined version, I had to switch the settings a little. So I went from ISO 100 to ISO 6400 and added this ring light. Otherwise the camera would not be able to calculate any exposure times just because there is no light at all. So again, we start with the ND 1000 and with additional ND 32. Yeah, my camera is not even able to compute any exposure times properly. So then we're gonna switch from ND 32 to ND 512 and there's just no light reaching the sensor. Okay, let's take a quick look on the computation and the math using ND filters. The ND 1000 reduces the amount of light by 10 stops. With the ND 1000 at bright sunlight you can use exposure times about 30 seconds at f16 and ISO 100. When adding a second ND filter, for example 32, this means that you lose 5 more stops of light. This allows you to take 32 times longer exposure times than just with the ND 1000. And when you combine the 1000 with the 512, you lose 19 stops of light. This means that you can use exposure times for like years. But why would you expose an image that long? The answer is, for example, when you want to take an image of the sun, but this will be part of another video. Normally I always try to be as professional as possible, but on that 5-day trip I actually forgot my adapter plate of my tripod, so I had to replace my tripod with seaweed, and it worked actually perfect. Even with a little wind I could use exposure times of 30 seconds and there was no motion blur caused by camera shake. As many ND filters on wide-angle lens have problems with vignetting, and KF says that there is no vignetting at all, we have to take a closer look. Therefore I took an image of my white wall with even distributed light to see if there is some vignetting in the corners. I must say that the results are actually pretty good. Even if there would be a little bit of vignetting, that would not be visible on nature or sunset images. Yeah, I think I will never leave the house again without my ND filters, because when I'm hiking or on vacation and there is some interesting water, you'll have a very high chance to take a fantastic image just by using longer exposure times. Actually, I was not too satisfied with the images I took on Fehmarn, just because the wind was not strong enough, the water was not moving enough, and maybe the exposure times also were a little too short. So I hope for better conditions in the future, so that maybe I'm making an update video and then we'll also take a closer look on the variable filter. I hope that I could give you a little push to maybe try long exposure photography, because it's just so much fun. I was 5 days on Fehmarn, the weather was so bad, but yeah, I had a good time because I was always looking for a good image, and yeah, and the results were pretty okay. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed the video and hopefully see you in the next.